Welcome to the Connect Your Health to Life coaching podcast. I'm your host, Seth Lusk. I'm a master certified life coach and published author with a decade-long background working in the health, wellness, and fitness industry as a personal trainer, nutrition specialist, and life coach. If you're anything like me or the clients that I work with, then you might be struggling with some confidence issues or struggling with feeling like you're not living your most fulfilling or authentic life. You may be trying to figure out why you have these amazing desires for what your most fulfilling life would look like, but you can't seem to create consistent action in your life to reflect those desires. So join me as we dive in deep on what it means to truly live a fulfilled and authentic life from the inside out. We're going to look from the perspective of an empowered mindset and uncover some of the reasons why you might be what's holding yourself back from living that most fulfilling life. But don't worry, this isn't about blame, guilt, or shame. This is about empowering you to see. I'm going to break through some of the biggest illusions and myths that we've all been taught to believe along the way. And I'm so excited to have you with me on this journey. So my only question for you is, are you ready to start living your most fulfilling life once and for all? Then let's get started, shall we? Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. For those of you listening in for the first time, welcome. You picked a fascinating episode to join in on. I say that every week, and I mean it every week. This week is going to be really interesting. Great conversation. We just ended our 2-part series on escape debt. And this week, we're starting on a new topic. It's not a series, so this is a one-time topic, although it's not really a one-time topic. It's something I've talked about before, but it's not something I'm doing a series on. So if you didn't listen to the previous episode, it's okay to listen in on this one. It's not one of these series that you need to have listened to the previous episode. But I am going to reference some topics that I would recommend you going back and listening to if while listening to this episode you think, I want to know a little bit more about that, or I wonder where he's coming from with this. So this week, we are talking about what I am calling toxic culture. And I want to talk to you all about this because I've talked about it before, as I said, but I want to I've talked about it before in some very specific contexts. And this week, I want to talk about it in maybe a little bit more of a broad context and how I'm seeing it happening now. And I want to first of all say that when I talk about toxic culture, I'm not talking about the fact that our culture is toxic. Actually, me saying that would go completely against everything that I'm wanting to talk with you all about today. What I'm wanting to talk with you all is about a trend that I'm seeing in the use of this word, toxic. And before, I've talked with you all about this idea of there being toxic people in the world. And so many times people throw this out there, toxic boyfriend, toxic friend, toxic boss, toxic whoever. And I've talked with you all about how using this term can be very misleading and why we want to stop using this term to describe things outside of us. And as a coach, I'm on social media quite often, and I'm seeing this trend spreading to so many other areas in life now. The word toxic has become this socially accepted kind of catch-all term for anything that someone might not like in their life now. Something being labeled as toxic, quote unquote, is this socially accepted version of something being something that someone is, allowed to or should remove from their life. This being whether it be people, relationships, bosses, coworkers, friends, certain social environments, family members, celebrities, social media itself, certain social media platforms. The list just goes on and on with a number of things that people are slapping this label of toxic on, just to feel like they can be validated and making the decision to remove something from their life. And so today, I want to talk about this trend and why it's not only harming us, but it's also something that we don't want to ignore or continue perpetuating in our lives as being a reason for, quote unquote, cutting things out of our life. So let's start, as usual, with some definitions first. Okay, so let's define this word toxic that we're all throwing around so much. So one definition of it can be something that is poisonous. Okay, that's one definition. The definition that I found that's a little bit more elaborative and I think helpful for us to understand the direction that I'm going in today in talking about this. The definition is toxic means very harmful or unpleasant in a pervasive or insidious way. And that brings up two other words that I want to define here. So what does pervasive mean? So pervasive means that it is spreading widely throughout an area or a group of people. Okay, so we go back to the definition of toxic, which would mean it's something that is very harmful or pleasant in a way that it is spreading widely throughout an area or throughout a group of people, or it could even be within a person's body itself. Like for instance, cancer can be pervasive. And the next word I want to define within this definition is the word insidious. So the word insidious basically means proceeding in a gradual, subtle way with very harmful effects. So we go back to the word toxic and we define it as being very harmful or unpleasant in a way where it is spreading widely throughout an area and proceeds in a gradual and subtle way with very harmful effects. So if we look at these definitions, then what makes something toxic is if it slowly causes harm that spreads. Usually when we're talking about things being toxic, especially when with other people or circumstances, the area where it spreads is we're usually talking about our own life. So maybe in an office space, it could also be that it spreads through the office environment. When we talk about social structures being toxic, we might be referring to them spreading throughout a group of people or a social structure, a social group. So here is what I want to look at today, though. We can choose to look at people. We can choose to look at circumstances or relationships or social structures, social environments. The list goes on and on as being toxic to us. We can do that. We've been doing it. But when we do this, what is the objective? What do we want to gain from doing this? I think that's a really important question for us to look at and answer, because for most people, what they're looking to is to gain this sense of validation that they can cut this thing out of their life and feel justified in doing it. We feel like social norms having our back in cutting this thing out of our life makes it okay for us. Okay, so we believe that this is somehow the desired outcome. But why? Why do we see this outcome as being desirable, that we want to feel justified in needing to cut something out of our lives? First of all, we're already disempowered in the fact that we're using a word in order to feel socially normalized in taking an action instead of doing what feels authentic and true for us. We're already disempowering ourselves and putting us in a state of victimhood. And the fact that we're relying on social norms to validate what it is that we want to do before we're willing to do it. And we've seen throughout the history of man that social norms don't always mean it's what's right. It doesn't always mean it's the truth. We have done so many different things in the names of social norms in the past that now we see, I don't ever want to do that again. So why is it that we believe that we need this socially normalized validation to do something, and we use this word toxic as a way to achieve that validation? That in and of itself is already problematic. But okay, so the desired outcome here is that we think that we can validate ourselves in doing this. But the question that I have then is, why is it that we feel like we want to validate cutting something out of our lives? Why do we see this outcome of cutting something out of our lives as being desirable? Every time we feel like we have to cut something out of our life, what we're doing is we shrink what is possible in our life. Every time we cut something out of our life, we give power to the thing to be able to create our experience and our emotional experience of the world. By feeling like we have to cut something out of our lives to feel what we want to feel in our lives, we give our power away. So why is it that we feel that this is the desirable outcome that we want? Why do we do this? I believe it stems from some very deeply socially programmed norms for us that they sort of take the role of victimhood in our lives but we don't really see it that way. We're not taught to see it as being a role of victimhood. We have been taught for so long, from generation to generation, that this method of ridding circumstances or ridding people from life that we feel a certain way around, that we believe should not or could not or cannot or we're not able to feel or that we don't want to feel, when we feel that these people or these circumstances in our life that we feel this way around, we feel that the best way to deal with it and make our life better is we think that it's to cut that part of our life out of the human experience and the emotional experience of life. We see that as being the program solution that we've gone to for so long in our from generation to generation. This method has been handed down. But if we really think about it, then all we're doing is making what is possible in life smaller and smaller for ourselves the entire time. And we're becoming more and more resistant to the vast reality of possibilities and truths of this life. Every time we believe that the desired outcome is to cut a part of the reality of life out of our life because we don't like how we feel around it, that's what we're doing. And we're at the same time giving our power to the thing to determine how we feel in our life. So here's where we end up. And the truth of the matter is, even if we can shrink life, quote unquote, and manipulate it enough to create some fake experience of it that feels, quote unquote, comfortable enough for us, along will just come something else to let us know that life is still life. And we can't control all of it. And in fact, trying to do so, it's what's causing most of us the most suffering that we're trying to avoid in the world. So the very act of trying to avoid and cut these things out of our life is creating the suffering that we think we're trying to avoid. When we take this approach of labeling things as toxic in the world around us, whether it be people, whether it be circumstances, whether it be social environments, social constructs, whatever it might be, when we are so busy labeling those things as being toxic so that we can validate ridding life of those things, or at least our part of life of those things, this is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to escape. We're trying to avoid. We're trying to suppress. We're trying to manipulate, and we're trying to control life and the full reality of it. We're trying to deny parts of reality of life. When we talk about people being toxic, for instance, we're trying to say that certain behaviors that people exhibit make them a quote-unquote kind of person. And this quote-unquote kind of person should not be in this life. But the truth of the matter is, they are. They are in this life. People exhibiting these behaviors that we feel toxic around are in this life. So saying they shouldn't be here isn't the truth, because they are here. So they should be here. The question is, why are they here? Why are people in this life exhibiting these behaviors? But instead what we do is we cut it out of our version of life, and we're in denial of the existence of the truth of why people do exist that exhibit these behaviors. And we label these people that exhibit these behaviors as being a type of person because we lump the behavior being what the person is or who the person is. And this is also it's a false label. And I've talked about this so many times before of why a person's behavior is not who they are or what they are. But what we're doing is we're living in this denial. We're living in this existence of trying to deny and turn away from the reality of the fact that there are people in this world that exhibit these behaviors. And we're telling ourselves they shouldn't be here, but they are. So there's a reason why they're here. There's a reason why these behaviors are coming out of these people. They're not just doing it for the hell of it. There's a reason why they're doing it. And it goes back to why we exhibit behaviors in the first place. And we'll talk more about that, and I have talked about it before in previous episodes. But what we're doing is we're avoiding the opportunity to understand these behaviors by slapping the label of toxic on it and being like, that shouldn't be here, cut it out of life. And we're avoiding the opportunity to understand these behaviors in a way that doesn't feel toxic to us. And to help people who do exhibit these behaviors to understand why they're doing them so that they see that they have a choice in continuing to choose them or not choose them. But instead, what we do is we just slap a label on it and kick it out, right? But the thing is, we have this beautiful example of it in such a socially normalized way. We do the same thing with people who exhibit these sort of behaviors that we have labeled as being criminal in life. And what we do with these people is we slap the label of criminal on them, we slap the label of toxic on them, and we cut them out of life. We just try to send them away and pretend that people like this do not and should not exist. And since we're not killing them, what we do is we just shove them in a concrete box somewhere in a cell, and we try and pretend like they don't exist. They're not our problem. They're locked away somewhere. They're not a part of life. And we just keep doing this with people. And we're doing it in life too every time we cut a person out of our life because we feel like they are toxic. And we pretend that these people don't or shouldn't exist. And every time someone does exist around us that exhibits these behaviors, and we recognize it, the solution is just to keep removing them from life and pretending like they don't exist, put them in a, sort of make-believe concrete prison cell we're not inside of in life, and we remove ourselves, or we remove that person from our life. We basically put them in an imaginary prison in our minds, and this is our solution. But have you ever noticed something here? No matter how many people who have been convicted of committing the act of murder or robbery or assault, whatever it might be, no matter how many people that exhibit these behaviors that we put in prison, murder rates are still rising. Violence rates are still rising. People are still out there stealing things from people. People who will commit these acts still exist. And they're born every day into this world. People are born every day in this world and end up exhibiting these behaviors. So why do we believe that the solution of just putting them in a box somewhere when they start exhibiting these behaviors and being like, oh, you're not allowed to be a part of life anymore, you're gone? Why do we see this as being a solution? Because it's not solving anything. We're not reducing the rates. We're not, getting rid of the people that do this, because we're not looking at why people are doing this to begin with. So the behavior just keeps coming back in other people and in more people and in more people and in more people. So why is this denial, removal, resistance, judgment, and labeling process still our preferred chosen method of dealing with these behaviors? That question baffles me. It's a question I've asked myself so many times. So many times I've asked. And I've asked other people the same question for so long. Why do we keep thinking that this is a solution? Why are we not trying to solve for why some people believe that these behaviors are the best choice that they have in life? And how do we solve for that reason why? How do we help people to have the tools to know why murder is not the only action that they have available to them to solve the problem that they think that they're facing? To solve for their resistance to their experience of the world and the emotions that they feel within it? Why are we not solving for that? Because guess what? People who exhibit behaviors of murder, they're also trying to rid life of certain quote-unquote types of people. They're doing the same thing. They're just not doing it in a government-sanctioned way of putting them in a prison cell. They're doing it with, whatever method they choose to use to murder a person with. But they're doing it because they also believe that certain quote-unquote types of people should not exist in this life, that they feel are toxic. And to them, the best way to rid it is not to just cut them out of their life. It's to cut them out of life in general. Just kill them. So why are we not paying attention to why some people develop this behavior as being their best coping strategy for dealing with that? And the truth of the matter is, we're all doing it in a more socially normalized way. And somehow we still feel like this is the best method for dealing with what things we feel uncomfortable with in life, dealing with things we feel like are toxic in life. I want you to think about that. I want you all to take some time to really think about that. Why is this our approach? Why do we keep socially normalizing this approach in more palatable ways than murder? I just want you all to think about that. Let's get back to this idea, though, of labeling so many things as toxic. Have you noticed that the list of things that we label as toxic is just increasing at a quicker and quicker rate every time you turn around? Because I have. I have. I'm on social media as a coach all the time because I'm posting and I'm looking for the issues that people are facing in the world and how I can help them solve them. And I've noticed this trend just peaking and peaking and peaking and growing and growing and growing of the number of things that we are willing to just slap the label of toxic on and be like, okay, well, that thing is now toxic. Let's cut it out of life. I've noticed this. And I'm sure a lot of you have too. Yet it seems that not a single toxic label has helped anyone get any closer to living a life in which that feeling of something being toxic to them is actually solvable by them, other than to cut something out of their life or to make that thing in their life have to change in order for them to feel better. Or to make their life smaller by cutting things out of their life, make it more resistant to reality and less empowered. This slapping the label of toxic on everything that we feel uncomfortable around is putting us in this state. And what I want to say is that there is another way. I'm not here to say that anyone should or has to choose this way. But hey, I'm looking around at the people trying to use this toxic labeling process, and I'm seeing a bunch of emotional victimhood, a bunch of emotional reactivity, a bunch of suffering, and people living these small, hiding lives in which they are convinced that why they feel this way is something outside of their fault, and the only way to change that is for everything outside of them to change, and that they have no power until those things outside of them change, or they just cut it out of their life and make it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I'm seeing suffering in people's lives that use this method just increasing as they are ever increasing the number of things that they are slapping the label of toxic on and that they need to keep out of their life. And I, for one, don't want to believe that this is my only option in life. So I've been looking for another way, and I looked for another belief, and I looked for empowerment. And the truth was, guys, I'm sorry, it was not that hard to find either, once I set the intention to find it. And to believe that there is another way out there, that is about empowerment, that isn't about victimhood. I went back to the thought model here, and for those of you that don't know what that is, I'm going to give you a simplified version here, but I discuss it in much greater detail in earlier episodes, and so I recommend going back and listening to those episodes. So the thought model goes like this. Step 1, all circumstances are 100% neutral until we have a thought about them. And this means people, situations, environments, jobs, bosses, coworkers, friends, weather, social structures, events. Everything is neutral until we have a thought about it. Once we have a thought about any circumstance, we begin to have feelings about the circumstance. And depending on how we're taught to think about those feelings, we might label that emotional experience as negative or positive. But the truth is also, emotions are not necessarily negative or positive. We are taught to have a negative or positive relationship to them. For instance, if I'm taught that anger is a bad emotion, then when I experience something and then have a thought about it that stimulates the emotion of anger, then I might feel that the experience is negative. But remember that the circumstance or the experience itself is neutral until I have a thought about it, or you have a thought about it, and then label the subsequent emotions that follow the thoughts and beliefs of that circumstance, okay? So, then the next step, based on the emotions that we experience and our thoughts and beliefs about those emotions, guess what we do? We take action. Now, most of the time, people are in emotional childhood or emotional victimhood or emotional irresponsibility, whichever label you want to put on that, which means that the action is some pre-programmed reaction to the appearance of that emotion. And it's that emotion's tie to previous circumstances and stories about those circumstances that our brain then ties into the current circumstance, and then a reaction occurs. And the person reacts. So the action is not created with empowerment or intention. It is a reaction, and usually is not even a reaction to what is happening, but is actually a reaction to a story from a past occurrence that the brain is now associating with the current occurrence. And I see people in this all of the time, especially people that love throwing around this toxic label. So then the next step, once we take action, or we take the path of reaction, we have results. Okay? So the last step is the results, which is basically what happens as a result of the action or reaction that we took or had. And the thought model starts all over again right there. And this happens all of the time in your life, second to second, minute to minute, 24/7 in your life, whether you are aware of it or not, or if you choose to believe in it or not. It is happening. It's happening right now as you're listening to me talk. And I teach the thought model and how to use it to make empowered, emotionally responsible actions that we choose, and we make those possible in our life, and that life then creates the life that we want instead of a life of emotional reactivity, of emotional victimhood, in which the person doesn't feel in power of what they are creating in their life because they don't feel in power of their emotional experience and their actions that they take from those emotions. So most people are living in a life in which this model is playing out all day long, 24/7 in their life, without them actually paying attention to the fact that it's happening and using it in a way that it's a tool that they can leverage to create the life that they want. So you might be asking, why is this important for our discussion today about this socially normalized culture of labeling things in life as toxic? And how do we apply this there? So let me bridge this information for you here in case you haven't bridged that yourself yet. So, first disclaimer before I bridge this information. I'm sure there are some medical phenomenon out there, so I'm not going to say this is not possible. So I'm not speaking in definites here. I'm sure there are some medical phenomenon out there that could possibly exist or do already exist in which a person's body chemistry is in some way, it could be physically toxic to another person in a way of how their body would physically react to the chemical makeup of another person, okay? I'm not here to say that that is not possible or doesn't ever exist in the world, so don't start throwing out these extreme cases to me and me. I'm like, oh, well, so-and-so had, an allergic reaction to someone else's sweat when it touched them, and that's a toxic person to them, and you shouldn't be saying people can't be toxic, because I'm not trying to say that. It would be such a distant possibility, though, and so few and far between that it does not account for this recent surge in the usage of the word toxic to describe other people in our lives. There are instances also in which an environment that has black mold in it, or maybe asbestos, or maybe radiation, or maybe some kind of chemicals, etc., whatever it could be present in these environments. And these chemicals in the environment create a toxic effect on the body when in those environments, meaning the environment is toxic. So I don't want people being like, oh, well, you don't know there are environments that can be toxic for... I don't want to hear any of that, because that's not what we're here to debate today. That's not what we're talking about today, okay? That's my disclaimer. What we are talking about is the usage of this word to describe people because of how we feel around them and their behaviors. We use it to describe the way we feel in groups of people because of how we feel about their behaviors. Or in certain social situations because of how we feel about the people in that social situation. And it feels toxic to us. We are using this word to describe the effects we see in the way people behave or feel when they are living in certain social situations or circumstances for a period of time that are not about a chemical being present that is toxic to the body. They're not about a physical reaction of someone else's body touching theirs or chemicals from their body touching theirs and creating a physical reaction. That's not what we're using it for when we're using it in this modern usage of the word toxic. We're using it to describe a feeling that we feel around behaviors and our ideas about them. And I am not here to say that this feeling cannot or does not or should not exist. I'm not here to say that either. Or that this feeling, when viewed as being toxic, doesn't feel harmful for us or can't create damage in a person's life either, or in their mental or physical health. I'm not here to say that either. But here's what I am here to say. The label, the way we are using it, is a misdirect from the true source. Those feelings that we get around these people do feel very toxic. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have that feeling, but when we label the other person as being the thing that's toxic, we don't get to the source of that feeling. And I'm not here to say that those feelings of toxic feeling doesn't actually cause damage within a person, because it can. But again, when we label the other person as toxic, we never get to the source of the feeling, and therefore cutting the person out of our life doesn't stop the damage of that toxic feeling. So here is where the thought model applies here, and this is why I brought it up. The feeling of these social situations, these environments, groups, people, circumstances, etc., whatever we're labeling as toxic, that feels toxic, the feeling is not coming from the group, the circumstance, the person, the situation, or the environment, or whatever it is you're labeling it as that. That's not where it's coming from. It's coming from the stories and thoughts that we have going on in our own minds about those things. That's where the feeling comes from. And here is where the problem that I see lies. And lies. Like literally it's laying there, and it's literally lying to us. Because when we label the person, or the relationship, or the relative, or the work environment, or the company, or the business, or the celebrity, or the politician, or the boss, or the social structure, or the friend, or whatever it is, when we label that as toxic, here's what we do. We give the thing that we labeled as toxic all of our power to make us feel that feeling of toxicity. And when we do that, we don't look at the source of that feeling, and therefore the source is still there, and we never actually give ourselves the power of finding a way to heal that source. We are literally giving the thing full permission to make us have that feeling. And guess what? We have to give it permission in order for it to do that, because otherwise it can't. And we give it permission to do so by ignoring our stories and our thoughts about it and just allowing them to play freely in the background without awareness, without examination, or without intent, and therefore to create these feelings and reactions within us without our sovereignty, without our intent being involved, without who we truly are and what we truly want out of life being involved in any of that decision making. We're literally handing the steering wheel to the very thing that we don't trust to have the steering wheel. And my question is, why on earth would we keep doing that? Why is that our solution? Why are we entrusting our power of our emotional experience to something that we feel toxicity around? Why would we do that? I think for most people it's because they're completely unaware that another option exists. I feel like they don't even know that there's an option that exists in which we are empowered. And for others, they might vaguely know that another option exists, but they don't know what it is. For others, they might think that the only other option that exists is to become this doormat for the things that we want to label as toxic, and that doesn't feel good either. Or that the only other option is one of suffering and misery and weakness or whatever. I think that most people are unaware of the power they could have at their disposal in their life in these areas where they feel toxicity, if they chose to not take the route of labeling this thing as being what is toxic, and instead chose emotional responsibility and empowerment and saw that what feels toxic is what they're telling themselves about the thing, the belief about the thing. And I think this is why so many people keep choosing this. For others, I think it's because maybe it feels more comfortable and familiar. So therefore it feels easier for them to just keep throwing their hands in the air like there's nothing that they can do and just keep giving up their power. It's learned helplessness and victimhood. And these can convince someone to believe that the feeling of helplessness is more comfortable than the feeling of sovereignty and empowerment because it's what they're used to. It's not actually comfortable for them, but at least their brain's like, oh, I know how to stay alive in this environment. Even though we're suffering, it's okay, I can keep us alive here. And so we keep repeating the pattern, even though we want to find another way, because at least it's familiar to our brain. And again, we're not using our brains for us, we're letting our brains use us for them. And so therefore the brain, in its desire to seek the familiar and the comfortable, we allow it to keep us in that cycle, where we feel completely disempowered, but then we don't want to take any action steps that would put us in a position of sovereignty and empowerment. I think this is why so many people keep sticking with this solution, and then they fight the idea that there could be another solution because they're terrified of stepping outside of that familiar territory that they're suffering inside of. So yeah, I truly see this happening in the world around us as a result of many generations of social programming and learned helplessness and learned victimhood, and we're being guided to remain unaware of this by so many social structures that exist around us with the agenda to keep us unaware of it. But this only works as long as we keep giving our power to these social structures and not believing that another option could possibly exist that would involve us being empowered. So what I'm offering here today with this episode is that I'm offering a wake-up call. As I see this culture of labeling things as toxic emerging, I'm offering you the awareness to see where this trend is leading us, and the ability to make a conscious choice about if that is truly the path that you want to take, and if it will bring you to the life that you truly want. Or are you just unaware and blindly following a path of social norm that leads you into more learned victimhood and learned helplessness? Because there is another way. That way is the path of emotional responsibility, emotional empowerment, and emotional acceptance, meaning the acceptance that all emotions are there for a good reason, to show you something important. And they're not there to be resisted while you try and cut things out of your life that you misguidedly believe are making you feel those emotions that you think shouldn't be there. And so I'm here today because I want to shine a light on a path that says there is another way, and that emotional responsibility and emotional empowerment is that way, and it doesn't feel like this shameful, guilty, icky, stuck resistance feeling that we're all so used to feeling when we go about making changes. And I know that some of you might be wondering, okay, so if I want to choose this path, then what? Well, first of all, I would suggest talking with a coach who is there to help people in this area of finding their emotional responsibility, finding their authentic wants and path in life. Then what it is going to look like is noticing all of the things in your life that you have this urge to label as being toxic, and therefore feel like you have to remove from your life. And from there, begin to examine your stories about those things in your life. Whether it be people, circumstances, relationships, environments, social structures, social media platforms, whatever it is, really examine your story around it with curiosity and detail. I love working with a coach in this because a coach can hear my story, where I'm saying things as if they just are, and then can place a very powerful question mark in the story that turns a statement into an opportunity to open up other possibilities where you would not have ever looked before. And this is why examining these stories is so important. And why, until you've learned the strategies of how to examine these stories, how to place those powerful question marks within your stories and in your statements, working with a coach is going to be a great idea for you. Probably the best one. I know that in my own life, I used to label so many people that I tried to become friends with as being toxic. So I want to bring you all a real life example here so you can see how this plays out. And you can also see how I've put this into action in my own life and reversed it, and how it's not just a theory. It's something that has real life application here and makes a massive change in how you can show up in your life. It's not just something tiny to overlook and sweep up under the rug and be like, oh yeah, that'll be cute to look at later when I'm rich and have lots of time and money and I'm happier then, and then I'll look at this stuff. No, it's actually going to be what frees you to make the decisions in your life to create the life that you're wanting to be living, that you think once you get there, that's when you'll deal with this stuff. Okay? So I want to give you an example here. I would cut people out of my life because of how I felt when I was trying to be around people and spend time with them. And I got to the point where I was cutting people out of my life and not giving them the time of day at a rate where soon, if I kept it up, I was just going to be some hermit in my home alone all of the time. And what I did is I started to realize that I was like, this can't be my life. This can't be the life that I want to create for myself. And I got so pissed off when I would see this because I'm like, but there's nothing I can do about it. I'm stuck and I have to, and I was in this state of victimhood. But I had this feeling that was like, no, Seth, this isn't it for you. And I, of course, every time this would jump up, I would jump into self-judgment and the thought of that there's just something so wrong with me that I keep creating this in my life. And there's something so wrong with me that I feel like these other people are toxic to me. Maybe I'm the toxic one, I thought. And then I realized as I learned, as I started to dive into self-help and I started looking into self-coaching and coaching I started to learn about this thought model that I've started teaching you guys. And I started putting that thought model into practice in my life and started to notice that in order to put this into practice in my life, it would mean that neither I or the people around me are toxic. I was telling many toxic stories about these people to myself and about myself when around these people, and that's what felt toxic to me. Those stories were bringing up feelings that I associated with some really big wounding from my childhood that I hadn't fully healed because I didn't even know that I had the option to heal it, or that it was even really there, or that it was actually wounding. And I was feeling emotions as a result of those stories and wounds, and I started looking into those stories and wounds. And I had some really strong coping strategies that I had learned as a child with the intention of protecting myself. And those coping strategies usually involved hating a person to the point where I could prove to myself that I was better off without this person in my life, and that I could prove to them how utterly useless they were to me, and that I would feel better then once I proved to them that I didn't need them, because the truth was I felt like I needed them, and I needed to prove to myself that I didn't, because I was in such a state of victimhood. And that I could eventually teach these people that they would regret ever being such a toxic person to me in my life, because I would cut them out with such force and hate them with so much disdain that they would feel it and be miserable once they learned how good of a person I was and that they had no worthiness to be around me. Like, that was my strategy as a child. That's what I learned. Because I felt like the only other option was to believe that I was so messed up beyond repair that nobody would ever love me. So my strategy was one of denial, one of resistance, one of really petty revenge that I enacted over and over and over again in my life. I wanted to make other people feel as bad as I did, because I didn't realize I was making myself feel bad because of what I thought I had to believe about myself, what I thought I had to believe was wrong with me. I wanted other people to feel as bad as I did. But the thing was, with hate and anger and disdain, I was poisoning myself in hopes that the other person would die. I came to realize this. It was like I was drinking a cup of poison hoping it would kill another person. And I noticed a pattern of me cutting people out of my life. People especially that were late when we made plans together, or canceled on me more times than I thought they should when we had plans together. And I labeled them as toxic because they didn't respect my time. And that these kind of people are toxic to me in life. And I should just cut them out. And then I needed them to feel as disrespected as I felt. So I made sure that I showed them how little their time meant to me too. And the more I did this, the smaller and smaller my social circles became. And the larger and larger my feelings of hatred for people became. Only I was the one feeling that hatred. No one else was. It was my feeling living in me. And I was out trying to create more of it in other people's lives, hoping that if I could see another person feeling it, then I could convince myself that I made them feel it and that it would somehow feel better for me. But it never did. They might feel hate too for whatever thoughts they might have. But even if I noticed them feeling hate, whatever fleeting sense of satisfaction I might get from seeing them was immediately followed by that gut-wrenching, heavy feeling of my own hate still there, growing inside of me. When I came to the realization through learning the thought model that my feelings were actually being created in me by me, I was like, hold on, why am I doing this? Why am I, if I'm responsible for my feelings, why do I keep creating this in my life? And I knew I wanted to get to work in this area of my life. And I wanted to do that first because it was the biggest area where I was just making my life smaller and smaller and labeling more and more people as toxic. And I knew that I wanted to stop seeing other people as being the ones that were the source of making me feel this heavy, toxic, gross, sticky feeling inside of me. My first move was to see that hatred was an emotion that I was choosing to feel. And I wasn't broken. I came at it from that angle. Okay, so I'm choosing to feel this, and it's not because I'm broken. So if it's not because I'm broken, why was I choosing it? I chose to believe that I chose it to show myself something. Instead of believing that it was some emotion that other people were making me feel that I should not have to feel, or needed to get rid of, or that I wasn't able to feel because it would do something bad to me. And when I chose this other path, when I did this, I found the true source of my hatred was my own thinking that I was not worth the time, that I was not important, that I was not good enough for people to respect and spend time with. And this came from many stories that I had from my childhood, where I didn't understand my own emotional responsibility. I didn't understand that I was the source of my emotions, and so I thought other people were making me feel it, and so I thought other people were the source of me feeling these things about myself, and kept overlooking the fact that I had a choice. I had a choice to believe those things about me, and I didn't have to believe them, but I was choosing to believe them, and that's where my feeling of hatred was coming from. I felt like I was broken, diseased, annoying, insignificant, ugly, unimpressive, an inconvenience of a person that, of course, no one would want to give their time to. So any opportunity that I had to create more evidence of this belief, guess what? My brain took it. I.e., meaning someone being late, someone canceling plans, someone saying no to plans that I offered to them multiple times. My brain would be like, oh, see, that's your evidence right there. See, you're insignificant, you're ugly, you're unimpressive, you're inconvenient, you're diseased, you're annoying, you're broken, no one wants to spend time with you. My brain was very healthy in being able to activate confirmation bias. My brain was very highly evolved to do exactly what it was evolved to do, and I was letting my brain use me. My brain was trying to protect me from my own belief that other people would not value me or my time, and that this was dangerous for me. And so therefore, my brain went about creating this world in which that was the truth. And I shrunk in it, and I hid in it, and I hated in it, and I suffered in it for years, trying to escape something out there, making my world smaller and smaller and smaller as I tried to cut the things out of my life that I thought was the source of this toxic feeling, until there was less and less in my world. But as I was having less and less in my world, the source of the toxic feeling became bigger and bigger as far as the proportion of it, what it took up in my world, because it was all that was left that I was living with, because the source was my thinking. And as I shut more and more things out of my life, guess what? My thinking became a bigger and bigger portion of what my life was, because there was nothing outside of me to talk to, because I was cutting it all out. And so all I was left with was me and my own voice in my head, which was the true source of that feeling of toxicity. I was shutting everything out of my life and heading to a place where all that would be left was me and my thinking. Me, alone with the very thing that was creating this suffering that I was trying to get away from. But I wasn't aware of it. So what did I do? I had learned the thought model. I had learned to put it into practice. I had this realization that this is what I was doing in my life. And I was like, oh my God, I have so much power at my fingertips. And I've just been hiding with it all of this time and shrinking with it all of this time, surrounded by all of these thoughts as if I had no power over them. So here's what I did. I started practicing to speak my truth about how punctuality and reliability were important for me and why they felt that way for me. I was truthful about my fears and that I was responsible for them, but that I was learning to heal them right now. And what that meant is that for right now, I only wanted to put myself in the position of being canceled on or someone being late with me in small dosages. Not because those people or those circumstances were toxic, but because my thoughts and beliefs about what that meant about me felt very toxic. And so I wanted to learn to deal with these situations that were just going to be a part of life in a way where I wasn't making them toxic. And I did this in small dosages until I could learn a new way to look at these circumstances when this feeling that I had labeled as toxic would come up. I learned new ways to communicate my needs and wants in those circumstances of those small doses where I felt that toxic feeling. I started telling my truth in different ways to see if I could communicate it more and communicate more clearly what it was that I was trying and wanting to really create in those circumstances. Because the truth was, before, what I wanted to create was I wanted to feel connected. I wanted to feel understood. I wanted to feel seen. I wanted to feel important. I wanted to feel wanted. and cutting people out of my life that canceled on me or were late, well, guess what? That behavior didn't make me feel any of those things. I just felt more isolated than ever. So I learned to notice the feeling when it would come up, when someone canceled or when someone was late. And I would learn to look at the true want in those situations. That I wanted to feel connected. I wanted to feel understood. I wanted to feel seen. I wanted to feel important and wanted. And I learned to communicate that desire to the other person in a way where I was like, hey, this is what I'm trying to create right here. And right now I don't feel those things. And I get that this is in my power, but I just want to let you know this is why I feel this way about this situation. And I'm working on it right now. And this is what I want to feel. Now, this didn't always mean that they showed up or showed up on time when I communicated it. That's not at all the goal here. My goal wasn't to change them. It was to change my story. But what it did was it allowed the other person to see my true want and to make a decision as to whether or not they truly wanted to show up and be involved in that process of creating that feeling in my life. And if they did, cool. If they did not, I could release. And they could release this responsibility of each other's feelings. In that situation, we could both just release that without hard feelings, without hatred. We could do it with this authentic well-wishing and just walk away, feeling seen, feeling understood, and important enough for that person to respect that they were not in a place to meet that want and communicate that with me. And that felt so good. And other times, the person would hear my want, and they would see me. And while they had some behavior patterns that they might want to learn too, we got to work on finding ways to communicate our true wants more to each other, and how we could meet them with genuine yes solutions that worked for both of us. And it led to such feelings of empowerment and growth in my life, in my relationships in life. One of my closest friends here in Zurich, and if you're listening, I know you know exactly who you are as soon as I describe this situation, and I already know you know how much I love you. But guys, this friend of mine had really big struggles with behaviors that led them to being constantly late and canceling plans on me. I mean, constantly. I'd say 95% of the time. And we fought so many times over this. One time, we actually thought the friendship was over. Like, truly, we were like, it's not going to work anymore. We can't be friends. So we chose to take a step back. And we took a break, and we took time to really get back inside of ourselves and figure out what it was, where we were giving our power away. And then we slowly re-entered spending time with each other. I mean, really slow, with the most compassion, but also with brutal honesty about our feelings and true wants, and communicating our desires or our lack of desire to meet those wants, and the solutions that we could offer each other to do so, or how to work around not wishing to do so. We started communicating in ways that I'm not sure either of us thought was possible before that. And we started saying no to each other in ways that had so much love in them, and this release of responsibility of the other person's emotions, but with love and compassion for the fact that the person was feeling another emotion, and the release of guilt in a way that we didn't realize that would be possible for us before. More and more honesty flowed into that relationship where this toxic feeling had existed before. It would have been so easy for us to just label each other in our relationship as being toxic and just cut it out of our lives. But we stayed. We took responsibility. We chose compassion. We chose empowerment. We chose truth. We chose openness. We chose sovereignty in our own lives. And I think we can speak for both of us. I can speak for both of us in saying that we're both really surprised at how our friendship is growing in ways we didn't know that it could, even with more honest no's than ever. And what I mean by that is saying no where we honestly mean no. And even though we have more of those present in our relationship now than we ever had, and more present in our conversations than we ever had, it is coming with this feeling of freedom. And I feel closer to this friend than when we used to not tell each other no. I feel closer to them now that they are telling me no. I feel more like they care about me and respect me when they tell me no, because I know it's coming from a place of truth and love and respect, not out of hiding and resisting and playing victim in our relationships. And it's definitely not coming because of the fact that I'm broken and not worth being around. I've established that now. I tell you this story to give you a real life example in my own life of what it looks like when the knee-jerk reaction is to label someone as toxic, label a relationship as toxic and cut it out of your life. To notice that reaction, but instead to choose the path of emotional responsibility, to choose the path of communication, love, empowerment, and truth. And that when you do this, possibilities open up that will blow your damn mind. This is not something I teach in theory. This is something I live in practice. This is something I've been living and continue to live and feel the effects of in my life. And I want to see more people being able to put it into practice in their own life too. And this method of using toxic as a label for things out there isn't going to get us there. There's one more side to this that I want to talk about briefly with you all today in this episode. Before we go, I've explained to you all how using this word toxic to describe things outside of us in our life gives us this feeling of toxicity and puts us in a place of disempowerment and victimhood. I know that most people, at least on a theoretical level, know that they do not want to be in this position of disempowerment and victimhood. But a lot of us don't realize that we are, or don't realize that there's a way out, or we're scared of the way out because we're letting our brains use us. But also, using this term in this context has another side to it that we also want to pay attention to here. It's not just victimhood and disempowerment. And it's something that I've talked about many times before. And I know it is one that most of my clients, it takes them a bit to wrap their heads around when they start to see this or introduce this for the first time into their own lives. And it's this idea that using guilt and shame or judgment or fear as a basis for change does not lead to authentic, real, or fulfilling, sustainable changes. It doesn't. It never has, and it never will. I'm not going to go into the why of this today. I've talked about that in other episodes before. You can go back and listen to those. But I want to spend just a moment to explain how. When we use this term toxic to describe people, circumstances, or things in this life that we feel this feeling of toxicity around, that it's actually us using that model of shame and guilt to change yet again. And here's how. When we use this term to describe something outside of us, or even to describe ourselves as toxic, we are first of all labeling a person as a type of person based on a behavior that we then label as being toxic. Behavior does not make a person who or what they are. Behavior is a learned response to the world and circumstances that is based in so much complex programming and learning. And these behaviors, therefore, can be altered or changed. So they are not the person. And I know that many people do not believe that this is possible, because we've used this model of shame, guilt, judgment for so long to create change that we keep seeing people going right back to old behaviors over and over again. So we perpetuate this belief that there are these types of people and that these types of people cannot change their behaviors. But I'm here to tell you that this is all a bunch of BS. Behaviors can be changed, and people are not their behaviors. I have found through choosing to believe this that it's not true. It's not true that people are their behaviors and that they cannot change. What I've found by choosing to believe that that's not true is that there is evidence. There is enough evidence to believe that people are capable of powerful and fascinating changes in their behavior that are authentic, fulfilling, and lifelong when we let go of this model of shame, guilt, judgment, and fear as being how we create the change. So when we use this term toxic to describe things or people, we're using a term to describe something bad that we don't want in life. We're using it to describe a person usually, but sometimes it's also a circumstance that contains people within them. And what we want is for the thing or the person being labeled as toxic to feel so ashamed, so guilty of being this label, quote unquote, that is bad or broken or wrong in this life, that they feel so ashamed and guilty about that they would have to or feel like they should change. And this, my friends, is the model of guilt and shame for change. And it doesn't work. Even when we use it on ourselves, it will not work. It has never worked, and it will not work. It never has and it never will, my friends. I promise you that. Any change coming from this model is done in denial, resistance to the truth, and therefore it can't lead to real change. It's also done in hate, disgust, and resentment. And these lead people to launch themselves away from something without knowing really why this desire is genuine for them, or where they're genuinely wanting to go. Instead, it's about escaping a feeling of being unworthy. And we all know what escape does. Go back and listen to the last 2 episodes that I did on escape debt. It creates debt in our lives. And that debt builds and builds and builds until we're so uncomfortable in our life. Guess what we do? We go right back to the old behavior that is at least familiar for us. Even though we're creating debt, and even though we feel miserable in it and we feel so disempowered and such a victim in that life, we are not taught to believe that there's another way. And we're so scared to look at the possibility of another way because we're letting our brains use us. So we all just feel stuck in these cycles, and we feel like using shame and guilt is the only way to create change, and therefore nobody can change. But that's not the truth. We've given this model of change enough airtime as far as I'm concerned. Like, it's had way more than its fair share of airtime. And it's led us no closer to real, sustainable, or fulfilling change. And what I'm here to say is that you can drop it, and there's another way. Whenever you're ready, it's there. So my friends, this toxic culture that I'm talking about, this idea that labeling things in life as toxic in order to change life enough for us to feel fulfilled and happy in it, it's getting us nowhere that we want to go. Even if it might seem to bring some immediate sense of a cheap gratification that something is changing, the change puts us in disempowerment and victimhood and into these loops of cycling right back to old behaviors and bringing the same things back into our life again, because the true source of this feeling is our own thoughts. So if we're not looking there and changing those, then guess what? The same things will keep happening in life, just in different forms. The change puts us into a model of shame and guilt that will just circle us right back to where we are now, making another thing in life feel toxic, that we need to control, that we need to get rid of, that we need to shame or guilt into submission, until our worlds are so resistant, so small, and we all feel so trapped and reactive within them, which is so obvious in the news today when you look out there, that we're all just a bunch of snapping, reactive, emotional children in this world, feeling this feeling of toxicity without realizing that we're creating it for ourselves. And I, for one, am ready for a different path. I found a different path. I put it into practice in my life, so it's not even theoretical. And I see my clients doing it too. And I am blown away every time at how much I see my life and other people's lives expanding and opening and feeling exciting and fulfilling again to them because they put this different path into practice. And what I want to do is I want to offer that to anyone here that is listening who recognizes this pattern in their life and is ready for something different, ready to try a path that empowers them to open their life instead of cutting things out and shrinking it, and continually feeling like that's what they have to do to make their life better, to feel safe, to feel fulfilled, and to feel good in it. I'm here to say that there is another way. There is another way, and I found it. Many of my clients have found it, and I'm here to show it to you. Whenever you're ready. You don't have to. You can keep living this life the way you're doing it. But I want you to ask, if you're really honest and you listen to this episode, do you really want to continue down this path? Or do you feel like you have to? Or you're scared to try something different, or it won't work for you? That's just another story, my friends. And I'm here to show you that this path will work for you too. All right? That's what I have for you all today. That is what I have for you all today. And I want to leave it here. I have so much more that we could dive into. I could talk for hours about this. But for this episode, I leave you with this awareness, this insight, and this hope that there is another way. And with the action step that you can reach out if you're ready to step into that path of empowerment anytime you want. I'm here to support you. I'm here to get you moving in your authentic path forward here. And I promise it will work for you. I promise it will. I'm excited to be seeing this change happening in one heart, in one life at a time. With every client that I share this with, every person who listens to this. As I share this with more and more people and work with more and more clients, I'm excited to see this changing in the world. The release of this model of guilt and shame and victimhood. And I look forward to seeing it put into practice in more lives, with your lives as well, those of you listening in right now. So all I'm saying is take that step, reach out. Let's get you on a new path here, my friends, instead of trying the same one over and over again and getting the same results. All right? I love you all. And until we meet again here next week, ciao. Hey, thank you for listening in this week. I hope you enjoyed the content of this episode. If you did, please subscribe or follow this podcast to receive the newest episodes every week as I bring them to you here on the Connect Your Health to Life coaching channel. Ratings, reviews, and comments are always appreciated. These allow me to know more of what my listeners would like in the podcast and allow for more people who may be searching for a podcast just like this one to find the Connect Your Health to Life coaching channel. If you would like more information about me and the work that I do with my clients one-on-one, then please visit my website at www.slch.ch. Again, that is www.slch.ch. You can also find me on social media on Instagram at SethLusk_coaching. Again, that is SethLusk_coaching. And on Facebook in my free Facebook group community called A Healthy Life Connection. We would love to have you in the group, and it's only 3 membership questions that you have to answer to join. And again, it's entirely free. And if you need any further information or just want to say hello, feel free to send me an email directly at slusk.health@slch.ch. Again, that is slusk.health@slch.ch. Thank you again so much for listening, and I look forward to our next time together. Ciao.